This functional anatomy video is for topics in the learning E muscular system. Within E2 skeletal muscle fiber types. So the last section of E1 muscle types is about the specific structure and anatomy of skeletal muscles, and you have to, within this topic, learn the names of the three layers of connective tissue. Here's the spec. So we've learned already about the three types of muscle tissues: cardiac, smooth, skeletal. Then we learned more about the types of skeletal muscle fiber, and now we're going to learn about a muscle and how it's not a solid muscle. It's actually made up of lots of components, and as I said, you've got to learn the names of the three layers of connective tissue, and I'll give you a way of trying to remember that. Now, I don't know if you would recognize this, a Russian doll. So if this was the outer doll, this doll would be inside, 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 and you screw them in half and out comes another doll. And I've used this because your muscles are kind of like that. They're any one muscle, let's say your biceps brachii, is not a solid muscle. It's not just the outer doll. It's constructed and structured by lots of smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller components and parts. And we've got to know what those smaller sections are and be able to name them. So let's have a look. This actually looks like they're trying to show you one of the forearm muscles, and this is the muscle, and they've cut it in a cross section, so they've chopped it in half. Obviously the muscle is normally longer than that. We've got a tendon at one end, and we would have a tendon at the other end, but they've chopped a cross section so that you can show and see very clearly the inside of the muscle. Things to point out. So this is called the muscle belly. The middle fat bit of the muscle is called the muscle belly. Obviously, we know that a tendon is connective tissue, and it attaches the muscle to a bone. This connective tissue, this tendon, doesn't just stop where the muscle fiber begins, but this connective tissue continues and wraps around the outside of the whole muscle. Now, the name of that outer layer of connective tissue, which they've just pulled away a little bit here, is called the epimysium, or epimysium, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So the layer of connective tissue that wraps around the whole muscle is called the epimysium, outer layer. Then you can see that this whole muscle is made up of lots of these, looks like pizzas, don't they? But they're bundles of muscle fibers. So each one of these is a bundle of lots of individual muscle fibers inside. And those bundles are wrapped together. They're like wrapped. There's this connective tissue wrapping around them, and it looks like this white material here. Now, they've actually extracted one of those bundles just to show you what it looks like. We'll come to that in a moment. But remember, the tendon, the connective tissue from the tendon extends, keeps going, wraps around the outside of the muscle. It's called the epimysium. And the connective tissue that's wrapping around all of these bundles of muscle fibers is called the perimysium. So they wrap around the outside of a bundle. So around this bundle, you'd have connective tissue, and it's called the perimysium. Sometimes I imagine the connective tissue being a bit like cling film, wrapping around the outside, wrapping around those, holding them all together. So we've got epimysium around the outer whole muscle, perimysium around the bundle of muscle fibers. Now we've got a posh name for the bundle of muscle fibers, and it's called a fascicle. So this is a muscle fascicle, which is another name for a bundle of muscle cells, muscle fibers. Now, this bundle here has had one muscle fiber extracted. So that's a fiber, that, and this is all individual muscle fibers. So that could be a type 1, a type 2A, a type 2X type of muscle fiber. And again, we've got connective tissue wrapping around all of these individual muscle fibers. And we've got a different name for that. It's called the endomysium. So the 4 terms you must learn for this section is epimysium, perimysium, fascicle, endomysium. Okay, 3 of those are connective tissue wrapping around layers, And one of them, the fascicle, is just the name for a bundle of muscle fibers together. Notably, this single muscle fiber here also looks like a pizza because it's not a solid cell, it's made up itself. So one muscle fiber is made up of lots of myofibrils. And we will look in detail later at what myofibrils are and what they do. So look, up to 1 million fibers in a whole muscle, hundreds in a fascicle. So it's hundreds in a fascicle, thousands of muscle fibers in each fascicle, 2,000 myofibrils in a muscle fiber. So it's incredibly complex. But you must learn epimysium, perimysium, fascicle, endomysium. My strategy to help you remember that, so this is just a different version of the same diagram. So again, there's our whole muscle cross-section, there's the cross-section. Now we're looking into the cross-section here. These are all fascicles. The fascicles are made up of lots of individual fibers. Here's a bundle, a fascicle. So each bundle is made up of lots of fibers. So this is a muscle fiber, this is a muscle fiber, this is a muscle fiber. Here's the single muscle fiber cell, and you can see that it's made up of lots of individual myofibrils. So it's kind of like big to small to small to small to small in terms of structure. This is my way of helping you remember them. Eperfendo, epimysium, perimysium, fascicle, endomysium. And you will need to remember what they are. So epimysium is the connective tissue around the whole muscle belly, extending and continuing from the tendon. Perimysium is the connective tissue wrapping around the fascicle. What is a fascicle? It's a bundle of muscle fibers. The endomysium is the connective tissue wrapping around a single muscle cell. Of course, in the exam, they may give you a diagram. They may have a line going to a particular part and asking you to name that. It will only be probably those four things: fascicle, endo, epi, and perimysium. Of course, be aware that the tendon connects this whole muscle to bone at either end, and that the fat part of the muscle, the main bit of the muscle, is called the muscle belly. You may need to understand, certainly in a different topic, you will need to understand what a myofibril is. So this is a single muscle fiber, a muscle cell, and it's made up of lots of myofibrils, which actually in turn are made up of lots of proteins, which we'll learn about in probably one of the next videos. Final thing for this topic is looking at a muscle. We've talked about tendons. Let's look at this. Triceps brachii. So biceps is the flexor, triceps is the elbow extensor. You can see it on the gastrocnemius over here. We've got tendons attaching the two heads of the gastrocnemius up here, and we've got the Achilles tendon, which you should know, attaching to the calcaneus, the heel bone, down here in the back of your foot. What you've got to know is, what is a tendon? It's the connective tissue that attaches muscle to bone. And you've got to also know that we've got a name for the two ends of the tendons at each end of the muscles. So if this was your shoulder blade, this is your shoulder joint. Here are the origins, so the starting point, if you like, of tendons leading into the muscles that go down to the other end, where the other end of the muscle attaches via tendons. So the tendon nearest the axial skeleton, the attachment point of limbs, it's called the origin. It's fixed, doesn't tend to move. The other end, the tendon at the other end, at the distal end, which when the muscle contracts does move, is called the insertion. So you've got to learn what origin means, what insertion means, and over here we've got the definitions. Origin is the attachment of the muscle it's the tendon at the proximal end of the muscle, which is fixed and doesn't move. So these are the origins. When you contract your biceps brachii, this end doesn't move, it's this end that moves and is pulled up. Okay, so the fixed end is the origin, the moving end, the tendon which is the moving end, is called the insertion. Just a couple of key terms for you to know. Just before I finish, a couple of other bits of detail, I guess, that lead into following videos. So a single muscle is made up of lots of myofibrils, and we will learn in detail about this. So this is a myofibril. We've got lots of these packed together in a single muscle fiber cell. What you possibly can see is some beginnings of structure. We've got this Z line, zigzag Z line here, a zigzag Z line there. Now that structure there is called a sarcomere. This is the contractile unit of a myofibril. This is the place where our muscle shortens when we contract. We'll learn about how that happens. Now, this myofibril is made up of two different kinds of protein called actin, and you can see actin is this globular looking protein here, and myosin. This myosin is the thick myofilament. It's got these little arms and heads. So actin and myosin interact. Basically, they slide past each other when your muscle is contracting, and these Z lines are both pulled towards this middle, and this sarcomere distance shortens when our muscles contract. Right, but we look at that in much more detail. But this is a myofibril, which several myofibrils make up a muscle fiber, and this is the sarcomere that makes up the myofibril. So this is one sarcomere. We'd have another one going off to the right, we'd have another one going off to the left, etc., etc. Key things to know: muscles have blood vessels supplying oxygen and removing waste products, and muscles must have a nerve, as we know already from motor units. They must have a nerve innervating it, making it, telling it, initiating a contraction. This isn't on your spec. I put it in italics just so that you can be mindful of it, but the muscle fibers are structured in any muscle, possibly in different shapes. So this is probably your standard muscle, isn't it, with a big fat muscle belly and a tendon at either end. This is called a fusiform muscle shape. Parallel muscles, abdominal muscles. We've got unipennate muscles, we've got bipennate. Bi means two, like rectus femoris, one of your quadricep muscles. Deltoids are multipennate, multiple sections. Circular muscles, we've got to learn about precapillary sphincters. Convergent, your pectoralis major is this sort of shape going into your sternum in the middle. So this would be where your arm is. So just so you know, muscles come in different shapes. So in terms of this section, the main thing you have to learn is that epifendo, the different layers of connective tissue, and what a fascicle is. And I imagine it'll either questions will come in two ways, like this, where it asks you to name one of the layers. So it tells you the endomysium is the layer surrounding each muscle fiber. Name the layer of muscle surrounding the whole muscle. So it's given you one of the layer names, and it wants you to answer what is the name of this other layer. And hopefully you would have said it's the epimysium for that one mark. So that's one way. Or it could come as a diagram, and like the diagrams I've shown you, and it might point to one or some of them and ask you to name those layers.